It was just an ordinary afternoon, and Sammy, my daughter, was out having fun with her friends. That gave me the perfect opportunity to rest for a while, so I was alone at home, enjoying the peace and quiet. And I remembered that I had ordered some things on Amazon last week. According to the email, they were supposed to arrive around 4 o'clock. Suddenly, I heard a van pull up right in front of my house. I looked out the window and saw the typical Amazon van, nothing out of the ordinary. A short guy in a delivery man's uniform got out of the vehicle carrying a package. I didn't think much of it. He looked like just another delivery man. So I went to the door to receive my order. When I opened the door, he looked at me with a smile that didn't quite convince me. There was something strange about him. Maybe it was that his uniform looked a bit odd, or his expression seemed a little tense, as if he were hiding something. But I didn't think about it. I just thanked him for the delivery and took a step back inside, closing the door behind me. Then I put the package on the table and went back to the sofa. A few minutes later, I looked out of the window and realized that the guy hadn't left. He was going around the block and parking up again a few meters from my house. I started to feel a little uncomfortable, but I tried to calm down, thinking that maybe he had other deliveries in the area. However, I continued to look at the van out of the corner of my eye while trying to concentrate on something, but it was impossible. Then I saw the man get out of the vehicle again, and I immediately realized that something was wrong. But I tried to calm down, thinking that maybe he was just taking a break. About 30 minutes passed when I heard footsteps approaching again, but this time the sound was firmer, more insistent. I opened the door to look through the peephole, and there he was again. But this time he wasn't carrying a package. He was just standing there, as if he were waiting for something. Another thing that caught my attention was that he seemed more nervous. His posture was tense, and frankly, it made me feel uncomfortable. Panic began to grow in my chest, but I tried to remain calm. Who knows? Maybe he just wanted to confirm some information or something like that. However, before I could decide whether to open the door or leave it like that, he started banging on it hard, non-stop. My heart raced with each blow, and when I saw him from the side window, my heart stopped. Not only did the man not have a package, but he was holding a shotgun in his hands. At that moment, my blood ran cold. Immediately, my head began to spin, thinking about what I could do in that situation. But I was collapsed, so, without making a sound, I moved away from the door while he kept pounding harder and harder. All I knew was that if I stayed there, I would be in danger. Now the situation had become much more serious than I imagined, and I had to act fast. I had to think of a way out of there. In desperation, I ran to the kitchen in a hurry, looking for something to defend myself with. I knew there was nothing at home I could use as a weapon, and the only thing I could think of was a knife. So I opened the drawer and grabbed the biggest one I could find, trembling with nerves, and I started to approach the door. The guy was still there, banging on the door with the butt of his shotgun, now trying to break it down. Panic filled me completely. I couldn't just stand there with my arms crossed. I wasn't going to wait for him to break in. So plucking up my courage, I decided to open the door with a bang, and I pointed the knife at him, launching myself at him, trying to disarm him, but it wasn't that easy. The guy turned out to be stronger than I had thought, so we got into a brutal fight. I'm a big woman, and I was on the girls' wrestling team at school. That was a lifetime ago, but even so, I knew how to defend myself. However, I was up against a man about 6 feet tall, armed with a shotgun. I managed to land a good punch in the face after all that and a few kicks. But when I tried to take him down, he hit me on the head and I staggered. The shotgun slipped out of his hands, and when he took a step back, breathing heavily, it broke free from my grip and he grabbed it again. At that moment, I knew I was going to die if I didn't do something fast. So without thinking, I turned and ran inside, slamming the door shut. Immediately after entering the house, shots rang out. I hid behind one of the sofas just as the window panes began to shatter and furniture crashed to the floor. I knew I was in an extremely dangerous situation and needed to find an opportunity to get out or at least fight back. Knowing that the guy would enter the house at any moment, I ran to the end of the corridor where there was an old wooden piece of furniture behind which I could hide without being seen, and a moment later, I heard the guy's heavy footsteps in the living room. I poked my head out into the hallway and saw him searching through things, going through every room, and at that moment I realized that he hadn't just come in to scare me. He was stealing everything he could find. What was this? Was he just a thief, or was there something else going on here? The guy hadn't yet searched my hiding place. He seemed to have no idea where it was, but it wouldn't be long before he found me, so I decided to slip to the back of the house, trying to escape before he caught me. But just as I was about to leave, I heard a noise that made my blood run cold. It was Sammy. She had just come in and was scared when she saw the mess. This changed everything, as the guy also heard her and turned his head towards the front door. His face turned dark, and it was clear that he didn't want to deal with another person. So my plans to run away were ruined. Now I had to do whatever it took to keep him away from my daughter. I gritted my teeth at the thought of what I was about to do, but I couldn't let him hurt her. Suddenly, the man raised his gun and pointed it at the front door. Without thinking, I jumped out of my hiding place and lunged at him, hitting him on the back of the neck before he could shoot. The impact made him stagger, but he still didn't let go of the gun, so we started struggling again. But this time I had a small opening that allowed me to put him in a chokehold and knock him to the ground. And with a quick movement, I managed to take the shotgun out of his hands. The man, finding himself unarmed, ran like a madman towards his truck, while my daughter lay motionless in the doorway, completely shocked by what had just happened. I couldn't blame her. It was all so crazy and it had happened so fast. However, I couldn't let the guy get away with it, so I pointed the shotgun at him, and without blinking, I pulled the trigger. But nothing came out. It was at that moment that I realized that the gun was empty. He kept running towards his truck, but it was in vain. The police stopped him a few meters away and arrested him. I didn't know who had called the police. I assumed it was the neighbors who had heard the shots, but whoever it was, I was very grateful. The guy was shouting and kicking as they took him away, and I couldn't help wondering who he was and what he wanted. However, those answers came immediately. The policeman told me that the man was not a psychopath, nor did he know anything about me or my daughter. He was just a very desperate addict. The guy already had a record for robbery, possession of weapons, and illegal substances. When it was all over, I saw Sam on the floor, confused and sad. My daughter asked me why that man tried to kill us, so I answered her in the simplest way I could. He just wanted to rob us. She was looking for more answers, as if she were expecting a deeper justification, but I told her that was all I knew, and that made her cry. It hurt to see her like that. The fact that a thief would try to end our lives just to steal from us left an empty and sad feeling. But unfortunately, that's the world we live in. A while ago, I was trying to sell my 2007 Mercury Mariner. Although it was getting on in years and was a bit worn out, the car was still working great, so I thought I'd post it on Craigslist, as I'd had good experiences buying and selling cars there before. So I took several photos and posted the ad the next day, but I didn't receive a single message for the first few days. It wasn't until the third day that I received a text from a guy named Edgard, who said he was interested in the car. From the beginning, he seemed quite determined and offered me a reasonable price. I gave him my address so he could come and see it, and since I live in an apartment complex, I didn't think it would be a big problem. There were several buildings there, and I didn't think he could identify which one was mine. Edgard told me I could come by the next day after work, at around 9 p.m. Perfect, I said, so I cleaned the car and got it ready for sale. The following night, I left my apartment and went to the parking lot. Shortly afterwards, Edgard arrived and parked nearby. He was a fairly large guy, heavily tattooed and at least 250 pounds and 6 feet tall, so I was surprised to see him. After we introduced ourselves, I started showing him the car. Edgard examined it carefully and then asked to take it for a spin. I went with him and we drove around the block, and during the ride he told me that he liked the car and that it seemed like a good option. At that moment, I thought that maybe I could finally sell it that night. Then we went back and I parked the car in its place. But when we left, he told me that he would think about it. That disappointed me a little as he seemed so enthusiastic before, but I just said it was okay and said goodbye. That's when Edgard asked if he could use my bathroom quickly, and I thought that was weird. Why did I think he would be allowed into my apartment? Without thinking too much, I said no thanks and started to walk away. Frankly, I had a strange feeling as if it could be a trap, so I kept walking while he stayed by my car. My building has a front door and a side door, so I decided to leave by the front door, leaving Edgard there. As I walked, I was worried that he would follow me, but when I reached the entrance, I looked back and didn't see him, which made me feel a little calmer, and I entered the building. I turned right and took the elevator to the 3rd floor where my apartment was, but when I came out, I realized that the door at the end of the hall was open, and that's when I saw Edgard enter the hallway. I stopped dead in my tracks. What was he doing here? I thought, starting to get nervous. However, I began to walk towards my door, but when I saw Edgard heading towards me, I stopped again and turned my back on him, walking in the opposite direction again. At that moment, I heard Edgard start running towards me, and I knew then that it was time for me to start running too. I ran as if the devils were chasing me, and when I reached the end of the corridor, I went up the stairs and ran down them without stopping. I could hear Edgard behind me, so I didn't stop. I kept running to the underground parking lot, and once there, I continued running to the other side of the building while I could hear him following close behind. When I got to the stairs on the other side, I went up to ground level and went out the side door, ran to my car, jumped in and took off, burning rubber. As I drove, I called the police and told them about the guy. Then I drove around the nearby streets for a few minutes, a little nervous. When I returned, Edgard's car was still there, but he wasn't inside. The police arrived a few minutes later, and I didn't go back to the building until they did. It turned out that they found Edgard trying to break into another apartment, so in the end, he was never interested in my car, or he just wanted to take advantage of the situation to steal from me. Since then, I've been very careful when I post something for sale online. You never know what people's real intentions are, and it's better to take precautions. Have you ever gotten back together with an ex? I used to be one of those people who said it would never work out, but of course advice is easy to give until you find yourself in the situation. That's how I ended up talking to my ex again, and spoiler alert, it didn't end well. The day I chose to try and reconcile was, in fact, the worst day of my life. To give you an idea, I was almost killed. It all started when I received a package from Amazon. I still remember it like it was yesterday. A short blonde guy arrived at my door with a box. To be honest, I was surprised because neither I nor my family had ordered anything, and to top it all, the box was addressed to me. I received the box and didn't show it to anyone. I just took it straight to my room, and when I opened it, I was stunned. Inside, there was a bouquet of flowers, a box of chocolates, and a book, but not just any book. It was one by Edgar Allan Poe, my favorite author. At that moment, I realized that the package was a gift from my ex, Alex. It was easy to figure out because it was the same kind of gift he had given me on our first date a long time ago. I may have liked the gesture, but what really caught my attention was that he sent it through Amazon. Alex had always been an Amazon delivery man, but he had never sent me anything, and in this case, he had a friend send the package to me. I guess he thought it was more romantic that way, and to be honest, it kind of worked because I can't deny that I was excited. Alex was a nice guy and quite handsome. Tall, dark hair, brown eyes, and in good shape from being a basketball player. However, after a while of dating, our relationship wore thin, and I was the one who decided to break up. Over time, I missed him, but he changed his number and moved away. And when I tried to contact a mutual friend, he told me that Alex didn't want anything to do with me. That was the last time I heard from him, and I really regretted that breakup. A couple of weeks passed, and I kept receiving packages from Amazon, always delivered by the same guy. At first, I was sure he was a friend of Alex's, and each package contained letters saying that we would see each other soon, and that it would be a surprise. After several months, I started to get worried because although the idea still sounded romantic, it was starting to make me a little uncomfortable, so when the Amazon guy arrived again, I decided to set the record straight. "You're a friend of Alex, right?" I asked him. "I'm not sure if I should tell you this, but can you tell him I'd like to see him? I think this game has gone on long enough." He looked at me and agreed, saying he would do what he could. Then I locked myself in my house, hoping it would work. A few hours later, I received a message from an unknown number, and when I replied, that number added me to their contacts, and I saw their profile photo. It was Alex. His message said that he wanted to meet me in our special place, a corner that only we knew about, in a forest on the outskirts of the city. That place had always been private and almost no one dared to enter. But I knew that at the end of that overgrown path, there was a beautiful garden. On the night I would finally meet Alex, I was ready, as I had been so many times before. So I headed towards the abandoned area and walked straight to the garden. When I arrived, everything looked as I remembered it, but there was a strange feeling in the air. As I approached, I recalled those moments we had shared there, moments that used to be very special. However, anxiety was creeping in, because I hadn't seen Alex for a long time and I had no idea what might happen. I arrived a little before the agreed time, so I decided to make him wait a little, keep up the habit of arriving late. When I finally entered the garden, I was surprised not to see him, but I found a note in the center. It was clearly visible. This note told me to go to the tree where we had our first kiss, and without thinking, I ran there. The tree was only a few meters away, and as I approached, I saw 2 feet sticking out. But as I sniffed the air, I recognized a strange aroma, like something rotten, and when I finally arrived, I was shocked. There was Alex, but he was no longer alive. His body was dismembered, and his face showed so much terror that it was clear he had suffered a lot before he died. His eyes were missing and his hands had no fingers, and on his torso there was another note that said, "Do you want to be my girlfriend again?" I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I have no words to describe the horror I felt, and I don't even know how I didn't collapse to the floor immediately. But a moment later, in the midst of the confusion and horror, I started to vomit and then fell to the floor on my knees, unable to hold my legs. At that moment, I heard laughter behind me. I recognized that laughter immediately and turned around slowly. Oh my God. There was the Amazon delivery man smiling devilishly. "I'm sorry, I just had to see your face. I know I'm cruel, but I needed to see your reaction," he began, mocking me, as if all this were very funny. "Alex doesn't want to get back with you. In fact, he doesn't want anything anymore because he died weeks ago," he said and began to laugh out loud. I froze. At that moment, I couldn't feel any more fear and horror in my body. "What have you done?" I shouted at him, panic-stricken. He smiled again and continued, "Hey, don't blame me for everything. In fact, you're the reason this happened. Alex was my friend and he talked about you too much. It seemed like he really missed you, but he made one mistake. He trusted me too much. He told me everything, from what you liked to the places you used to go. He even showed me photos of you. And I have to be honest, I kind of liked you. So when he told me he wanted to get back together with you, well, that pushed me over the edge. My heart was about to jump out of my mouth. This man was sick and completely crazy, but what hurt me the most was thinking that Alex considered him his friend. And I couldn't imagine the horror he must have experienced when he realized that this psychopath actually wanted to kill him. "So you killed him," I said, trying to keep calm. It was a statement, not a question. An easy decision, yes. But I wanted more. I wanted to see you, and now what I really want is for you to be my next victim. My idea of an ideal date is to see you suffer and beg for your life. So I'm going to make you feel the same way Alex felt. That way you'll be connected forever. It's your fault you pushed me to do it." Before I could react, the guy lunged at me with a knife. He was too confident. He probably thought I couldn't defend myself because I was a woman. However, I am a strong girl and I know how to defend myself, something he didn't expect. When he came at me, I managed not only to dodge his attack but also to take the knife away from him, and just at that moment I hit him in the face with the handle, opening a large wound on his forehead. At that moment I took advantage of the carelessness and tried to escape. But before I could run away, he caught me by the foot and started biting me. The pain was unbearable and I screamed as loud as I could, trying to kick him to let me go. But it didn't work. That madman just kept crawling, tearing the skin on my leg. In a moment of desperation, I closed my eyes, feeling that my end was near, and while wishing for all this to end, I began to hear screams. I opened my eyes, trying to see where the screams were coming from, and that's when I saw a group of men catching the crazy Amazon guy and beating him up. I couldn't believe what was happening. I never imagined that someone would come to help me. While the men were holding him down and subduing him, another man ran over to me, pulling me out of my state of shock. I don't know how it happened, but thanks to his intervention, the psychopath was arrested and sentenced to life in prison. When it was all over, they took me to the hospital to have my injuries attended to. It was a long process, but I managed to recover physically. However, I couldn't stop thinking about what I had experienced. Every day was a reminder of the horror I had witnessed, and I cry from time to time remembering Alex, the love I felt for him, and the heartbreaking way I found him. The years have passed, and although I have tried to move on, sometimes I wake up at night thinking about that day. But I have also started a family and have a son, so I continue to live despite my traumas. Now, with a lot of effort, I try to find happiness in the midst of it all. My mom and I would go to my grandparents' house almost every weekend. My dad had left before I was born, so I was always very close to my mom and my grandparents. It was a routine. She would stay with them to socialize or work during the weekend, and I used to stay up late on Sunday. I remember one Sunday night during a vacation when they took me in the car. I was half asleep, and honestly, I don't remember much about the trip. I just know that they tied me to the seat, and suddenly I felt a chill on my face. I opened my eyes suddenly, and then I heard my mom begging them not to hurt her and not to hurt me. At that moment, I looked out of the window and saw what I thought was a monster, but in reality, it was a guy with a rabbit mask. But this wasn't one of those cheap plastic masks. It was terrifying, very realistic. The guy had stopped his car in the middle of the road, as if he'd had an accident, and when my mom stopped to help him, he put on a bird mask, and then his accomplice appeared with that rabbit mask. It was total chaos. Those men robbed us and then did something horrible to my mom. They almost killed her. She was in hospital for almost 2 weeks, and I ended up living with my grandparents for a year because she couldn't look after me. The experience left her devastated, and I wasn't unscathed either. I had nightmares about that rabbit-faced monster chasing my mother, and that image stayed with me for years. However, things got better over time, and by the time I turned 10, we started to get our life back on track. At 24, I was still living with my mom, but I was looking for my own place because I had gotten a decent job at the university. My new place was empty, so I started looking for cheap furniture and decorations. So one of the first things I did was check out Craigslist. There I found several interesting items at a good price. So I contacted a girl who was selling things from her grandfather's house. She told me she was selling everything to pay for a nursing home. She was very nice and offered me a discount if I bought several things at once. So I decided to go and see what she had. On Saturday afternoon, I drove to her grandfather's house, and the sweet girl greeted me with a smile, but when I saw her grandfather, I understood why they needed the money. Grandpa was in a terrible state, and I got the impression that he didn't even know what was going on. I didn't ask him any questions about it, but the poor old guy was strapped to his wheelchair and had an oxygen tank next to him. He barely reacted when his granddaughter introduced me, and it looked like he didn't have long to live. As we walked around the house, I noticed that there were many old and dusty things. The girl showed me a series of furniture and decorative objects, but I set out to check the 3 main things I wanted: a wardrobe, a desk, and a dining table. The granddaughter and I agreed on a price, and of course I was going to need a U-Haul to pick up the stuff later, and I thought I could organize everything for the following weekend as soon as I confirmed the purchase. Once that was done, We decided to have a coffee together, and she told me that almost everything in the house was for sale because her grandfather had lived a rather wild life in his youth. He had spent a lot of time in prison, and although he had changed over the years, his last incarceration left him without a penny for the future. It was quite a sad story, and she explained that the whole pile of stuff they had in the garage was also for sale and that I could look at whatever I wanted. At that moment, I thought about buying a few more things, maybe items that they wouldn't be able to sell easily, knickknacks or things to decorate my new space. The money would be spent on things that seemed valuable at the time. We finished our coffee and the girl went off to help her grandfather with something, so I decided to explore the garage. When I went inside, I was amazed at the amount of stuff that was piled up. It was a literal mountain of what they considered to be junk. However, I thought there might be some things worth keeping. I found all kinds of junk, from old cookie jars to books and strange ornaments. So I started going through the pile and setting aside some objects that I thought I could use. But suddenly, something stopped me in my tracks. It was an object that had been bright white, but now it was covered in a dirty, grayish-brown color. The paint on the eyes and mouth was peeling, but little by little I realized what it was. It was a rabbit mask. In that instant, I felt my stomach turn over. That mask was exactly like the one I had seen in my nightmares as a child, something that had traumatized my mother and me for years. That was the same mask, without a doubt. I remember staring at it, unable to move, and then suddenly stumbling away from the sink in disbelief. I told myself it couldn't be the same mask. It looked like one of those cheap Easter rabbit masks, but it was definitely the same style as the one worn by the criminal who almost took my mother. Suddenly, my mind started to put the pieces together. Granddad, with his history of going in and out of prison. It all started to make horrendous sense. I tried to calm down, and I think I did quite well gathering up all the things I had taken from the pile of rubbish. Then I went to the shop to finish the shopping, while trying to keep a straight face and my fake smile. When I paid, I decided to ask the girl why her grandfather had been in prison, and I noticed that she was a little confused. She didn't know much, only that he didn't like to talk about it and neither did his mom, so she thought it must be something he felt quite ashamed of. Her words echoed in my mind, and I imagined a dark secret behind that mask that took me back to the nightmare of my childhood. That moment was unsettling and left me with the feeling that my experience with that family might not be over after all. Trying to control my racing heart, I asked the girl if I could enter her grandfather's room using the excuse that I wanted to thank him in person. She seemed a little doubtful at first, telling me that he probably wouldn't hear me, and if he did, he wouldn't respond in any way. But I insisted calmly, and she finally agreed to let me in. Maybe she thought it was a sweet gesture, although I definitely came across as a bit strange at the time. When I got to his bedroom door, my hand was shaking as I gripped the handle to open it. And as I entered, I saw Granddad sitting in his wheelchair in front of a television he wasn't even watching. The man seemed lost in nothingness, staring into space. I sat on the bed trying to organize my thoughts before asking him the first question. And while I thought about what to say to him, I wondered what the hell I had been thinking. But I didn't hold back and finally blurted out something like, "Where did you live in December 1987? As his granddaughter had warned me, I got no answer, not even a slight sign that he had heard me. His gaze was still fixed on the wall, and the truth is that I wanted to turn around and leave. I wondered if I was confusing or annoying a sick old man, but there was something in me that wouldn't let me leave without asking him another question. So with a knot in my stomach, I asked him if he had robbed a mother and her son and abused her in the car. This time there was no movement in his body, except for his eyes, which slowly lifted. It wasn't as if he was simply looking. He seemed to be remembering something and then taking a breath. I told him that his granddaughter had told me that he had been in prison, but that she hadn't given me any details. However, I was beginning to suspect what one of the reasons might have been. The old man remained silent, but I could see his jaw trembling slightly as if he were trying to tell me something that was stuck in his throat. And at that moment, he blurted out a kind of lie, a brief no. Then I said to him, "I know it was you," and his reaction confirmed it to me, although I wasn't 100% sure what he had said. It was obvious that he found it difficult to communicate, and although his condition limited him, his face reflected a mixture of anger and confusion, as well as deep shame. However, I could also see some regret. I stood there, trying to process what that meant, as the echoes of my years of terror came flooding back. I noticed his eyes filling with tears, and although he couldn't speak, I could see frustration filling him. I didn't know if he was trying to communicate that he was sorry or if he just wanted me to go away. But at that moment, I didn't care what he had to say to me. There was only one more thing I needed to get off my chest before leaving. So full of rage, I said to him, "You almost ruined my life forever. You deserve to be in that chair." As I got up and left, I heard a little moan escape from Grandpa, and the granddaughter blocked my way out, wanting to thank me for my visit. I hid my feelings and told her it had been an emotional exchange, apologizing if I had upset her. I was sure she thought it was a noble gesture, which made me feel somewhat guilty, and I really hope she never finds out the truth. When I got back to my car, I had only driven a couple of blocks when I stopped suddenly and tears began to fall like a waterfall from my eyes. I was overcome with such deep anguish that I struggled with the idea that I might have caused irreparable harm to that sick old man. But deep down, that voice in my head kept repeating that it was him, that it was undoubtedly him. After a while, I tried to pull myself together and decided to go home and talk to my mother. I asked her if he had faced any consequences for what had happened that time, and she told me that he had, that the culprits had been imprisoned and that he had had to go to court as part of the process, and that this experience had taken such a toll on his mental health that he didn't even know that anyone had been arrested for it until that moment. I had always believed that no one had been caught, and it gave me some peace of mind to know that justice had been done in some way. I wondered if it would be wise to tell my mother about that encounter, or if she would really believe me when I told her what happened. I did it after all, and I was not mistaken. She seemed skeptical, as she thought it was too perfect, a movie-like coincidence, and she did not believe that such things happen in real life. The months that followed that experience left us feeling relieved. Although nothing could change the past or erase the trauma we both carried inside, knowing that that guy was suffering in some way was almost like proof that there was some kind of justice in this world. It may sound crazy, but I don't know how else to put it. Although I'm still not a fan of happy endings and I still think the world can be a cruel place, I am convinced that this thing we call divine justice really does exist. If you have ever shopped on Amazon, this story should grab your attention. I'm Finn, and I was a delivery guy for them for a while. I'll tell you, the most terrifying experience I had on that job was the reason I decided to throw it all away. And I'm not kidding, Jeff Bezos may make millions, but I'm not paid enough to put my life in danger. If you're a delivery driver, you know which areas of your city are safe and which aren't. And on this day, I was assigned to one of the worst. I'm telling you, I've seen horrible things in that neighborhood. From people struggling with addictions to scenes of crime in broad daylight that would make anyone's hair stand on end. The last time I was there, a group of guys in their 20s tried to steal the packages from the van and beat me up. I was lucky to get out of there alive, and I didn't deliver half of the stuff I was carrying that day. On that occasion, I learned that nothing is worth more than my life. For that day, my plan was simple: deliver quickly and get the hell out of there. Luckily, I only had 7 deliveries, which was fewer than usual. When I got to the neighborhood, I drove to the first address, where there was a rundown house with a porch that was falling apart and a roof that was crying out for repairs. The woman who lived there was clearly dealing with serious problems. She was an addict, and to tell the truth, the place looked like chaos. So I rang the doorbell, dropped the package, and ran away. The next deliveries were quick and uneventful, but then it was time for the penultimate one, and this is where things got complicated. That house looked even more neglected, as if it had been abandoned. It was the biggest in the neighborhood, but it had a terrifying air, like those mansions in horror movies that are falling apart. Without thinking too much about it, I drove to the address and picked up the large box-shaped package. When I arrived, I noticed that there was no doorbell, so I left the box on the porch and rang the doorbell, but there was no answer. If it was just a package I could leave, that would be fine, but it was a cash-on-delivery package, so I needed someone to come out and sign for it. I rang the bell several times, but nothing. That's when I noticed that the front door was ajar. It is not common for a delivery person to enter someone else's house, but curiosity got the better of me, so I went in. The house was dark, covered in dust and cobwebs, and there were old pieces of furniture that looked like they had been left there, forgotten. The further I went in, the more disturbing the place became. Finally, I decided to call to see if there was anyone at home. "Hello, is anyone there? I've come to deliver an Amazon package." Total silence. "Hello, anyone home?" No one replied, and the uneasiness began to increase. I tried again, but it was useless. The house was empty, and it looked abandoned. My instinct told me I should leave, but something stopped me. I don't know if it was curiosity or the strange feeling that there was something else in that house. So while my heart was beating fast, I decided to walk a little further inside, feeling that someone could appear at any moment. I was starting to think that the whole thing was a bad joke, but in the end I had a responsibility to my job, so instead of running away as I should have done, I approached a neighboring trailer and asked an old man if he knew anything about the big house. The guy looked at me suspiciously and finally told me that no one had lived there in over 10 years, just before slamming the door in my face. Not knowing what to do, I decided I had no choice and went back inside. "Hello, is anyone here? Please come to the door to receive the package. I have more deliveries to make." This time I didn't try to hide my frustration, and just as I was thinking of picking up the package and finally leaving, I heard a strange sound coming from upstairs. My instinct told me not to go upstairs, especially in such an old and neglected house, but curiosity and duty pushed me to do so. The second floor was much darker, with little light coming in through the dirty windows. From the end of the corridor came that strange sound again, like an animal moan. I felt like a character in a horror movie, but instead of backing out, I shouted, "Hello, is anyone there?" Nothing. Just the thick silence and that strange kind of whining that became more insistent. When I got to the room, I took a deep breath and opened the door. At first, I couldn't make anything out in the darkness, but after a few moments, my eyes adjusted, and I managed to see something. In the corner, a very thin woman was sitting. She had her back to me, facing the wall, and was wearing a threadbare robe that revealed her pale skin and dirty hair falling over her face. "Hey, miss, do you need something?" I asked, but she didn't reply. She just swayed back and forth as if she were lost in her own world. It was a curious and fearful sight at the same time. I took a step closer, and when I was close enough to touch her, I put my hand on her shoulder. I don't know how it happened, but suddenly she turned and attacked me. The woman was screaming and growling, and I jumped back, but I tripped over something and fell, hearing the crash of glass breaking next to me as if I had knocked over a table. I managed to get up as best I could, but she was still trying to get closer, although something was keeping her tied up. Looking closer, I saw that she was chained to the wall, limited to moving only a few feet. She looked really terrifying, so thin and pale that she almost looked like a ghost. However, her eyes were red and her mouth was foaming. Her tangled and dirty hair covered her face, and in an instant my flight instincts took over. But my curiosity was also too strong. Then I took out my phone to light up the room, and what I saw left me frozen. It was a kind of science laboratory full of strange equipment and shelves full of jars, but the most shocking thing was a dog chained in a corner, with a bowl of water and rice on the floor. It was as if it had all come out of a horror movie. I ran down the stairs, forgetting the package. I just wanted to get out of there. I finally made it to my van and left, knowing that I had failed 2 deliveries, which ensured my imminent dismissal. But honestly, at that point, I didn't care anymore. I just don't get paid enough. As I drove away from that horrible place, my mind raced. The house must have been a laboratory for cruel experiments, probably on humans. And what had happened to that woman? I didn't want to think about it, but a shiver ran down my spine at the thought of whether I should have called the police. What was really going on there? And what if the lost package meant something more than just a failed delivery? I didn't know. I finally called the police and told them everything I had seen in that house, but I never heard anything more about it. My name is Christina. I am a 30-year-old woman, and this happened to me just 2 years ago. At that time, I was looking for a temporary rental in another city. Without going into too much detail, I lived in a city that was very far from where my family was, but at that time one of my family members was going through something quite serious, which meant that I had to be there for a couple of months. And for me, staying in the family home was not an option, so I started looking for alternatives. The thought of paying for a hotel during that time was incredibly expensive, so my best option at the time was to rent a house or apartment close to where my relative was. However, this was a real challenge, as finding someone to rent from for just a few months was not an easy task, as the absolute minimum for most people renting is 6 months. I spent several full days looking for rentals online and basically had no luck. I searched through any number of websites, but always with the same result. The rental had to be for a minimum of 6 months. Time was running out and I was starting to despair. But luckily for me, after about a week of searching unsuccessfully for a temporary rental in that city, I finally came across a post that someone had made on Facebook Marketplace, which seemed to fit what I was looking for, and I didn't hesitate to write to them. A few minutes later, I received a reply from the owner. There was a phone number on the page, so I called it. The person who answered seemed to be an older woman. She spoke very slowly, but we had a conversation about the property and the prices, and she was kind enough to let me sign a lease for only 4 months. It was a small house, but it was quite close to where I needed to be, and the price was very cheap. At that moment, I felt very lucky, as I was already losing hope of getting something in time, so I quickly got everything ready and tried to leave everything in order at home, as I was going to be away for a long time. To cut a long story short, a few weeks later, I finally arrived at the property. There I could confirm that it was close enough to where I needed to be, but I also noticed that it was a long way from the main town and somewhat hidden in the forest. The woman did not meet me there, but instead left a key and some papers taped to the door, so I went in and had a look around. The house had all the basic amenities, and the truth is that everything looked in good condition. It was also clean, which I appreciated, although it seemed to me that it was smaller than it looked in the photos and a bit narrow, but for everything else I felt I had got a good deal. I unpacked a little and then rested. After the long journey, I didn't want to do much more than watch TV, but around 7 in the evening, someone knocked on the door. That surprised me a little, so I got up and checked my phone. I didn't see any text message from the lady saying she was coming. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. There was a man standing a few meters from the front of the porch. For a moment I hesitated, but finally I opened the door, not wide open, just enough to poke my head out. "Hello? How can I help you?" I said to the man. He kept a straight face as he explained that he was here to clean the chimney. I looked at his van, which was parked in the driveway behind my car, and then I looked back at him and said, "It's a bit late, don't you think?" It was almost 7:30 at night. It didn't seem like a suitable time to be cleaning chimneys, but he shrugged and said that it was the time and day that this service was scheduled for. I told him to wait a minute, closed the door, and went back to the living room. I sent the lady a text message and also tried to call her, but I couldn't get through. Then I went over to the fireplace and saw that it wasn't that dirty. I really didn't know what to think because it wasn't my house. Maybe it was just a cleaning service that the lady had scheduled as part of preparing the house for me. This may sound strange, but chimney cleaning was such a random service that I thought the man was probably not lying. Maybe if he had said he was a plumber or something as generic as that, I probably would have been more skeptical. I went back to the door, and when I opened it, I got a big shock, because the man was no longer standing in the middle of the porch. He was now in front of the door, just a couple of steps away from me. I jumped with surprise because I didn't expect him to be so close. Then suddenly, before I could open my mouth and say anything, he said with an unfriendly face that he needed to leave on time that night and that for that he had to start to work right away. So he quickly came over and put his hand on the door, pushing it open gently. This made me really uncomfortable and a little nervous, as the gesture was almost aggressive. I looked behind him and there was no one nor anyone in the surrounding area. So trying to sound polite, I said to him, "I understand. Just give me one more minute and I'll let you in." Then I tried to close the door, but the man put his hand on it and held it open, making it clear that he wasn't going to let me close it. So I had no choice but to let him in. This man was big and burly, and he had a large bag with him that gave me a bad feeling. Maybe it contained his work tools, but it could easily fit a body. I tried to act calm, but inside I was panicking, because I was alone in that house in the forest with this intimidating-looking stranger. In this situation, this guy could do whatever he wanted to me, since I was at his mercy. With these thoughts in mind, I walked slowly in front of him towards the fireplace, while he followed me very closely. And at that moment I said to him casually, "Do you see that over there?" Pointing into the fireplace. When I saw that he looked over, I ran out as fast as I could, grabbed my car and house keys from the table and bolted out of the house, quickly locking the front door behind me. He came after me and almost caught me when I reached the door, but I was faster and had time to lock it. Meanwhile, he started banging on the door and shouting insults at me. But with adrenaline at its peak, I started my car and put it in reverse, hitting his van in the process. And so I was able to drive out into the forest, dodging trees. As I drove, I wanted to call the police, but I realized that I had left my cell phone at home. So I got out on the highway and didn't stop until I reached a kind of supermarket, where I asked the security guards for help and told them to please call the police. They lent me a phone, and that's how I was able to make the report. When the officers arrived at the house, he and his van had already left and the front door was in pieces. The officers believe it was hit with an axe. Knowing that really scared me, because what would a chimney sweep be doing with an axe? It was clear to me that this man's intentions were different and very macabre. The police said that the man probably knew that this house was being rented and that whoever the new resident was, they wouldn't know if he was really scheduled to clean the chimney or not, so they could let him in from there. Nobody knows for sure what his intentions were because he was never found. But I immediately spoke to the owner. I told her what had happened, and fortunately she agreed to refund the money and cancel the contract. I never went back to that place again. It all started with my old SUV, which really wasn't worth much anymore. I bought a new car and decided to put the SUV up for sale for $3,000. Although it had a lot of mileage and was an older model, it still ran well. I took some photos of the car and posted it on Facebook Marketplace, and it wasn't long before messages started coming in. The first to contact me was a girl named Carla. She told me she was very interested and wanted to come and see it. I replied that she could come at any time, so she chose 8 p.m. the following day. That night, I took the car out of the garage and parked it in the driveway of my house, which is in a fairly quiet area, and my driveway is long enough to leave the SUV halfway down it. At 8 o'clock, I saw a van stop in front of the bushes just at the end of my garden. I was convinced it was Carla, and so it was. A woman came out of the van who looked exactly like the photo she had sent me. She had long blonde hair and was wearing a black coat. She came over, we greeted each other, and she started to inspect the car. And after a few minutes, she asked me if we could go for a drive to do a test drive. I agreed. So she got behind the wheel and I took a seat in the passenger seat. She backed out of the driveway and I decided it would be best to give her a tour of the neighborhood. The streets around here are quiet, so I thought it would be perfect. The test drive went pretty much as normal. Carla asked me several questions about the car and seemed really interested in buying it. I answered as best I could, and as I drove, I felt optimistic, thinking that maybe, just maybe, I could sell her the SUV. After about 15 minutes, we returned to my house. When we got out, she parked the car back where it was and gave me back the keys. She told me she wanted to think about it, to which I replied that was fine. Buying a car is an important decision. Although I was a little disappointed, I understood her position. We shook hands once more, she said goodbye and left. After going back inside the house, I calmly made myself comfortable in the living room. But just at that moment, I heard a strange noise. As I live alone and don't have any pets, I couldn't figure out what it could have been. Then I heard footsteps. They were coming from another room. I was right in the living room and it sounded like the footsteps were coming from the kitchen. My heart raced, and I immediately knew that something strange was going on. I had no idea who might be there, but I hadn't invited anyone else. I decided I had to check, so I took a breath to calm down, and with a firm step, I headed towards the kitchen, wondering to myself what or who was waiting for me in the darkness. I called out, trying to see if there was anyone at home. The silence was terrifying. Then I shouted at the top of my voice, telling anyone there to show themselves or I would call the police. As I backed towards the front door, thinking of running away if things got ugly, my heart was racing and I had no idea what to do. That's when I heard the back door open. I couldn't see him, so I was in panic mode. The door slammed shut, and I stood there unsure if the person had left or stayed inside. After 10 seconds of silence, blinking and waiting, I heard a noise outside. I turned around and saw a man running full speed down my driveway. It was night, and although the light was already gone, I noticed that he was wearing dark clothes. I couldn't see much else because of the lack of light, but instantly I felt my blood run cold. That feeling intensified when I saw the guy jump into the back seat of a van that had stopped abruptly in front of my house. My heart sank. It was the same vehicle that Carla had been driving. When the guy got in, the vehicle started up and drove away at full speed. I ran back to the house, my mind racing. I made sure no one was left, but it was too late. I checked my things and realized that several items were missing. Some cash from my room, an old watch I'd stored away, my old iPhone that I no longer used, and other little things I used to have lying around. Without thinking, I called the police and they arrived quickly. I told them everything that had happened, but I hadn't been able to get the license plate number of the van. Carla, if that really was her name, had blocked me from Facebook after what had happened. I felt like all I had done was invite misfortune into my own home. As I was talking to the officers, I realized that everything that had happened was my fault. I had left the garage door open. I didn't think that could make me vulnerable. In my neighborhood, it had always been quiet, and my garage is a bit out of the way, so I never thought anyone would break in. I guess that guy had been in Carla's car, and when we went out for the test drive, he took advantage of the moment to sneak in. From that day on, I learned that I couldn't trust anyone. From that moment on, every time I tried to sell something, I made sure the meeting was in a public place, preferably at a local business or something like that. If you ever use sites like Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist, take my advice. Meet in a place where there are people. It's not worth the risk. That experience taught me a hard lesson, and there are things I will never forget.